Hi, I'm Jessica King, and I'm here to remind you that there is life after love bombing. No matter how toxic your past relationship, you are not broken. You are beautiful, whole, and deserving of healthy, balanced love. I'm here to share my story. I am an empath who was taken in by a vulnerable or covert narcissist who absolutely turned my world upside down. I became ill, confused, and deeply unwell, but I'm happy to say I never lost connection to my spirit. I am not a victim. I am a healer, and I believe that if you were guided to this channel, you are too. Sometimes we have to experience the darkness to know the light. So healers, let's heal ourselves so we can uplift the world. Today I'd like to share 5 really important things that I learned from my relationship with a covert narcissist. And these 5 things are sort of like promises to my future self. Like, I promise to keep these lessons in mind as I heal and form new relationships in the future. Because I think that following these guidelines and lessons, it can help to protect us from falling into another unhealthy relationship. So, while reflecting recently, the first thing that I really learned that I don't want to forget is my first lesson is to go slow in forming relationships and to form a really solid base of friendship first. I think a lot of us, when we find ourselves in an unhealthy relationship or relationship with a narcissist, I think it's something that a lot of us will have in common is that that person moved really quickly into the relationship. I mean, like, they become really super intimate with you right away. And I think that can be a red flag sometimes. And that was the case for me when I was with this covert narcissist. It was like, he was like, "You're the love of my life," right away. I mean, he, even like the night that we met, like, he told me like that he knew that I was the one, like, immediately. Like, I'm talking about, like, literally he opened the door and saw me for the first time, and he was like, "You're it." Like, "You're the one, and you're my soulmate, and you're my everything." And, he really wanted me to give up my life and, like, come and just live with him and for us just to be together. And I did that, after just a couple of months. And I think that if I'm really honest with myself, he might have been trying to get me to commit really quickly because he knew that, like, eventually his true colors were going to come out, and he could only maintain that facade, and he could only maintain that, like, love bombing phase of the relationship for so long. So he's like, "I got to reel this one in, I've got to make sure I have her." And one of the most sinister parts of, like, narcissistic abuse, or the narcissist, that still really scares me when I think about it now, is that they want to make sure that they have control over you. So a lot of times, like, they don't really want to slow down in the beginning part of the relationship. They don't really want to build that trust and stuff. They want to build control. They want to take control. And so they kind of come in really strong in the beginning. And I realize now that if I would have slowed down a little bit in the relationship, then it might not have become a relationship. Like, I might have actually started to see his true colors a little bit more. I'm sure if I would have told him, like, instead of saying yes, when he said, "Come on, like, let's get together, let's move it together," and all this stuff, like, right away, if I would have said no, like, that alone probably would have caused the narcissistic rage, and I probably would have had some indication that something wasn't right sooner. So I learned it's okay to slow down in a relationship if the person is really genuinely interested, they'll be okay with taking it a little bit slower. And I also just learned how important it is to establish a friendship first. I remember like meeting the covert narcissist, and it was like only the second day that we met each other. And he was like, "Are we a couple?" And I was like, "I guess." Like, because I don't know, like, I just was like, "Okay, yeah, like, I guess so." And I'm not going to do that ever again. Like, there's no need to do that. So I learned to go slower in forming personal relationships. The next thing that I learned, which is probably like the most important thing of all, is I learned to listen to my body and honor its signals. I ended up being with this covert narcissist for 6 years. And the first time that I can remember feeling like a really strong sense of disharmony in my body when I came around him was very early on. It was just weeks into the relationship. And I ignored it. He painted this like amazing picture of himself as such a kind-hearted individual and such a good person. And it's like I let my mind convince me that that was true, even though my body was saying something's not right, something's not right, something's not right. And, you know, if you go around somebody and you always feel like a sinking sensation or a dread in that person's presence, or you just don't feel well around someone, that's your indication that something's not right. And I learned that, like, sometimes our body can pick up on things before our mind understands what's going on. And even though I'm somebody who's really, really connected to my intuition, it's like somehow I ignored my intuition here. And what ended up happening is over time, like as I ignored the stress signals in my body, every time I came around the covert narcissist, my body actually started to get sick, like really, really sick. And I'm sorry to my body, you know? And so what I learned is, like, in the future, I have to trust my body, even if my mind doesn't understand. If my body gives me a signal that something's not right, I'm going to listen to it, yeah? And I encourage you to do the same. The third thing that I learned is to tell someone if something in my life isn't right. And that might sound really obvious, but I had a lot of worries in this relationship with this covert narcissist. I had a lot of, I don't know, like there's so many things that would keep me up at night that I would think about. How did this happen? Is this right? Is this normal? Why are things like this? And I didn't mention these concerns with anyone. And I think that the psychological manipulation in these connections with the empath and narcissist is so maddening. And somehow he really suppressed my desire and ability to speak, especially about our relationship. He did it in subtle ways, but it was like he made me feel like we needed to maintain an image of our relationship looking perfect, and it was like his life depended on it. And actually, like, so much so that even when I left him, he asked me not to tell anybody because he said that my presence in his life gave him a lot more professional ethos and people respected him more. And he said something like, I'd really appreciate it if you didn't tell anybody about this because, being with you really helped to make my life a lot better and gave me a better job and gave me a lot more respect. Like, people respect me a lot more knowing that I'm with you. And so, if you don't want to be with me, that's one thing, but don't take away from me the benefit of people thinking that you're with me. Like, so that just kind of gives you an idea of, I think, what this person was like. But he would always, like, tell me stories about, like, he'd say that, like, oh, his mom asked him, oh, like, how's your relationship going? Are you having any issues? And he would always tell me that he always told everybody, like, that we weren't having any issues and stuff like that. And he gave me the feeling like, I did this, so, like, I expect you to do the same. And there was a big subtext that was like, don't you ever fucking tell anybody the way I treat you. Like, I don't know that he ever said it directly. And that's one of the most confusing things about the covert narcissist is, like, everything is, like, stated in energy or actions, not in words. So, like, the words that they say don't really sound that bad, but the way that they make you feel and what's stated with the way that they act is frightening. And even if I just think about, like, the way that he would treat me if I brought up any issues in our relationship, like, so if I try to have a conversation with him where I mentioned, like, something wasn't feeling right, or, he would do one of a couple of things. For the most part, he would try to ignore me. If that didn't work, you guys know the silent treatment if you've ever been with a narcissist. If that didn't work, then he would tell me, you're crazy. He'd be like, you're crazy. Like, what you're talking about, that didn't happen. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, that's not happening. Like, you're overanalyzing it. He would always say that, like, oh, you're overanalyzing this. This is not happening. I don't know what you're talking about. So they deny, like, your reality, which is what gaslighting is. But, like, it really made me wonder, like, is it happening? And the other thing that he would do, if I tried to bring up, like, ways that I was struggling in the relationship or stuff, is he would actually fall asleep. This narcissist was amazing at falling asleep at the at the best moments, or we could rather say the worst moments. So whenever I was going to bring something up about our relationship, he would be like, oh, I'm so tired. I'm sorry. Like, I'm so tired. Just like 1 minute into the conversation when he was alert before that, he'd be like, I'm so tired. I gotta take a nap. And so, I don't know, like, these subtle ways, it made me feel like, right, I can't speak out. Like, what I'm saying isn't even true, because he'd tell me I was crazy, and then, like, I seem to be putting people to sleep, like, whenever I talk about these things, and, he's like, doing all this to maintain an image and protecting my reputation by not ever saying anything negative about me to any of his friends or family, because he always stressed that, so, like, I should do the same. No. So, like, my lesson going forward is, like, if something happens, like, in a personal relationship, I'm not, like, and it doesn't feel right, I'm going to speak out to somebody about it and ask for their genuine feedback. And in my case, eventually, when I learned what a covert narcissist was, I said, oh my God, like, I literally could not sleep at all. And I stayed up and I wrote down, like, 5 events that had happened, which I'll probably share in a later video. 5 things that happened that stuck out to me as feeling really weird. And I wrote them on a piece of paper and I said, okay, it's the middle of the night. Tomorrow I am going to call somebody and I'm going to tell them that these 5 things that happened. And I am going to see what they say. And at that point, I didn't know, is he really a covert narcissist? Is this really happening? Are these things really unhealthy? And you know what happened is I called this person and I said, can I just share with you 5 things that happened in my relationship And the person said, yeah, no problem. And so I shared these 5 things, and right away, this person said, you are being emotionally abused. Like, and I couldn't believe it. I was shaking. I couldn't speak. I was like, what? Because I'd never spoken about these sorts of things. And I couldn't believe that as soon as I did, like, there was no question, that the person just immediately said, this is not right. You need to leave the person. So I learned that it's good to get feedback, like, about things. It can be scary to talk about things that, are concerning in a relationship, or, like, I'm the type of person where I wouldn't ever like to say anything negative or burden anybody, like, with my problems. And that ultimately ended in this relationship, like, almost killing me, because it affected me so much physically, the stress of it. Like, it ended up in this relationship with this covert narcissist, it going on for 6 years, whereas if I would have probably just said, like, the first time that he did something behind closed doors that really didn't seem right, if I would have just called a friend or called my mom or something like that and just shared it, when it first happened, that might have been, after a year or after 6 months, that person might have alerted me that something wasn't right sooner. So my lesson is to speak out if something doesn't feel right. And, maybe I'll do that at some point in the future, and, a friend will say, Jessica, you're crazy. You're like, that's normal. Like, that's just something that happens in relationships. It's not anything to worry about. Hopefully that's what they'll say. But on the off chance that there is something wrong, I know that speaking out to other people and getting feedback and stuff will help me to realize that sooner. The 4th lesson that I learned is just that I can say no to things that do not feel right. I realized that I wasn't saying no enough. I didn't have strong enough boundaries with the covert narcissist. And one of the reasons why I didn't have strong enough boundaries is because if I would say no, this person would act in shocking ways. Like, if you've ever been with a covert narcissist, they can throw tantrums that rival, the most unruly child that you've ever seen. But even if they don't do that, they will punish you in other ways. They will immediately go into some crazy emotions. They'll pout. They'll give you the silent treatment for days. They'll cry. And they'll make you feel like you're mean and you're being really unkind to them. And most of the time, like, if I ever did establish a boundary, somehow, like, within a couple of minutes, I would end up apologizing because he would make me feel like I was extremely cruel to put up any sort of boundary, and he'd just be like, how could you do that to me, and stuff. And so then at the end of it, I'd be like, I'm so sorry, I shouldn't have said no, I shouldn't have pushed you away like that. So no. Like, my lesson going forward is that, like, I have the right to establish boundaries with other people, and that my boundaries, like, should not be hurting somebody else. Like, it doesn't work like that. I think I'm still kind of turned around from this narcissistic experience, but I learned that not only can I say no and establish boundaries, but I have to. I have to do that. And if I put down a boundary with somebody and say, oh, right now I'm not comfortable with that or whatever, and the person does freak out, or they do give me the silent treatment, or they do make themselves a victim of my boundary, that person is not a healthy individual. So one way to test, I think, like, if you are dealing with a narcissist, is just say no. Like, just say no a couple times and see how they respond. And if the person, like, respects your no and they are kind and and there's no issue, they're probably not a narcissist. But if they take personal offense anytime that you say no, that's a good sign that something's not right. And the fifth thing that I learned is that it's okay to make mistakes. And that might sound a little bit strange, but again, one of the things that kept me in this relationship for such a long time is that I, promised to be with this person. And he would always remind me of that. He got me to promise really early in the relationship, now that I think back on it. I mean, like within the first week, he was like, "You're the one for me. Like, literally promise me that you'll be with me forever." And I said that I would. And now, like, looking back on that, it's like, oh my gosh, I wasn't in my right mind. Why did I say that? Like, I didn't even really know him at the time. But, I made that promise. And he would always remind me, you said and he would always check in too. And he'd be like, you told me that you want to be with me forever. You still intend on that, right? I mean, he now that I think about it, that was like almost like a day-to-day thing. And he would always remind me, like, remember, you told me that, like, I'm the one for you and you're gonna always be by me. And he would also do like checking ins of the future to make sure I was still there. So he'd be like, okay, so obviously we're going to be together forever. So what do you see us doing together next year? What do you see us doing together in 5 years? So he did all these things to like subtly reinforce, like, bitch, you've made a commitment to me and you better not like back out. Like, that's the energy that he was bringing. Apologies for swearing, but like, that's the energies that he was bringing. And it was like scary. And so what I realized is that no matter what like commitment I've made to a person or anything, to any life situation, if I make a commitment and then I later learn that the commitment is a mistake, it's okay to break the commitment. I think before I sort of identified myself as being like a person of integrity, and what it meant to me to have integrity is like that you fulfill your commitments. And so for a long time in the relationship, I was just fulfilling commitments, And I always felt like I can't leave this person because he's the victim, he's down in his life. How could I don't want to be that person that like walks away from somebody when they're at their darkest moment. But if you know about the covert narcissist, you'll know that they're always at their darkest moment. And so there's all these ways where I just like, it was hard to admit to myself and the world and my friends and family and everything, especially because like at the beginning of the relationship, there's so much love bombing and there's so much excitement and you really believe that it's your person. A lot of us like shout it from the rooftops, like, oh my gosh, like, yeah, like I did it, like I met this person and it's so wonderful. It can be really hard to go back later and be like, I was wrong. This wasn't what I thought that it was. And I made a mistake in this relationship. So I learned that going forward, one of the most protective things that I can do is admit my mistakes and give myself permission to leave behind things, even if I've made a promise, if those things later turn toxic. And so it's not for me about just, becoming all willy-nilly and just not fulfilling my commitments. But if I sign some sort of contract or something like that and it becomes a horribly toxic situation, I've learned that like I can step up and say, even if it was a work thing or something else, I can step up and say, you know what, actually, I know I agreed to do this thing for you or be this for you, but I'm sorry, I can't do that. I made a mistake. I shouldn't have agreed. And yeah, that's what I learned. Like, these are the 5 things that I learned, like, in my relationship with a covert narcissist. So just to summarize, like, there's so much more I learned, but these are the 5 most important things. First, to be friends first and really, like, slow down and savor the beginning parts of a new relationship and give it a little time so you can see who the person really is. Number 2, I learned to listen to my body, and I learned that if my body constantly feels stressed around an individual, even if I don't understand why, that individual isn't a good person to have around me, and I need to get distance. 3, I learned to speak out if something doesn't seem right that's going on in my personal life. Not to be afraid to burden people with my problems, not to feel we can all feel this pressure, especially with social media, to like keep things looking perfect on the outside. And I learned that that's not a good thing. And if something doesn't feel right, to get feedback, just give it to somebody else, talk about it, and see what comes out of that. The 4th thing I learned is to say no and establish boundaries. And I learned that if you say no and somebody becomes a perpetual victim of your no every time you say no, or they don't respect your no, that's a good sign that that person is really toxic for you. And the final thing that I learned is that it's okay to make a mistake, and it's okay to commit to doing something with someone, and then later, if you have a bad feeling, to say, I'm sorry, like, I'm really sorry I made a mistake, but I can't do that. So those are my 5 lessons from my empath narcissist relationship. I hope that if you've listened to this, I hope that some of these lessons resonate with you. And I'm so curious, what did you learn from spending time with a covert narcissist? What are your promises to your future self? Share them in the comments below. And if you enjoyed today's video, please consider subscribing and coming back for more regular content. Thank you for listening, and have a great day.